of a crime for which you should be punished. For this conviction, I would endanger my health. Shut it! Just consume great riches and lust for fame. No, you won't see us participating in that game. Keep it twisted, take on success. Cause all I really want is what's beating in your chest. Doctor, fix the anesthetist.
Welcome to the Inside the Boards podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you learn to think like a question writer so you can study smarter, not harder, and succeed in medical school.
I am Patrick Beeman, your host. Welcome to the Inside the Boards podcast. How perfect is that song for the podcast? I just want to thank Ryan Reynolds and Enter Shikari for letting us use this track. The track is Anesthetist off Enter Shikari's 2015 album, The Mind Sweep. I mean, this is like perfect. Listen to those words. Doctor, fetch the anesthetist, right? They even say like, illness is not an indulgence which you should pay for. If you want some socially conscious, upbeat music that will get you stoked about taking action in life, head over to entershikari.com or find them on Spotify. Keep in mind, our Step 1 Study Smarter series for the USMLE Step 1 and COMLEX Level 1 is available on a different channel. You have to search for the podcast on your favorite podcatcher or go to our website, insidetheboards.com. Oh, and speaking of, head over to insidetheboards.com, sign up for our email list. You will get access to a special offer on the Boards Workshop, which Ryan, I, and Maureen talk about in this episode. It's a two-parter. This is part 1. In episode 2, we will go over a question using some principles from STATmed Learning. All right, welcome to the Inside the Boards podcast. Today, we have Ryan Orwig from the STATmed program. He is back to discuss a little bit more about his platform. And in addition, we have a guest, which is one of his students, Maureen. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with you. What is your background, Maureen?
So I am currently a third-year psych resident in the Midwest. I'll be pursuing child and adolescent psych, and I went through med school like everyone else. But I had a very challenging first year. Almost didn't continue medical school, and it was a tough call whether or not I was going to stick with it. But it was actually through kind of serendipity almost that I was able to find out about Ryan and his program, and I really attribute his input and his influence as the whole reason that I stayed with med school and that I'm here as a resident.
Okay. Well, so that's interesting, especially considering the specialty you've gone into, which is particularly a doctor of the soul, the mind, right? Put us in the framework. Where were you when you first started having that feeling, maybe I'm not going to continue med school, this isn't worth it? Like, what was your state of mind and what had led you to that point?
So I remember I was nervous about starting medical school just because it was an unknown, and everyone talks about how hard it is. And of course, I think anyone would be kind of nervous and wondering, am I able to do this? It was honestly, I think the first or second day when it started, I had a feeling like I think I'm in trouble here. And everyone,
why?
It was the volume of material was like nothing I'd ever seen. And I remember thinking, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to remember all this. And, I remember saying that to other students, and they were like, oh yeah, me neither. But then they kind of got the swing of it. And here I am, and I'm not at all. And I'm like, oh my gosh, something's wrong. I don't know what it is. I don't know, am I just not capable of this? And I'm like, do I have a learning disability that I just never knew about? It was just a really awful experience that first year. And it started, from the first test, And then the whole year was an absolute drain and a struggle. It was brutal.
Yeah.
And you definitely I think a lot of it does a number on your self-confidence. I know some people talk about like, oh, I failed this one test once. Like, no, that doesn't capture it at all. It's having to go through this and work and work and work and work and work. And it's just not getting better. And you just don't understand why.
Okay. And I do want to get, I'll come back to that. But, then let me ask. So we're at the beginning of our Study Smarter series for step 1, right? We take the time to provide some hopefully high yield content to help people learn on the go. At least that's kind of how we market it. But like the deeper goal that I have is to help students redeem a little bit of their lives somehow by helping them learn to think about the strategies involved in test taking a little bit more, and to gain that confidence and perspective that really is necessary, I think, to live a fulfilled life within medicine. If you're always under the gun, and it's always stressful, like a little bit of stress is good. A lot of bit of stress is incapacitating, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So second year, it's March, April. You are, I assume, thinking about step 1 coming up.
Absolutely. So after, okay, so we'll start there. So the step 1 is coming up in March and April, and you're aware of it. I started having the realization that because, first year was so brutal, truthfully, I don't think I learned anything. Honestly, I don't think nothing was retained at all. It was just this horrible experience. And things aren't going to be encoded permanently under circumstances like that. Yeah. So I knew that I was probably going to have to delay the test, mainly because I had to learn first year material. I truly didn't know it. Yeah. So I kind of I was saying to my school, like, listen, this is what I'm going to do. I know they recommend you not do that, but I felt like in my situation, it was warranted. And then we took I think it was one NBME, the school NBME. Thank you. The school asked us to take, and they said, you have to get a certain score in order for you to move forward. And I took that, and I think I was under it by like just a couple points. I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm not in as bad shape as I thought. But I know as I started studying and then going through the material, going through first year stuff was like, I don't want to use the word PTSD because it's just over dramatic, but it just brought back that whole year, which was not pleasant. But then I'm making my score isn't going up. I'm taking these tests over and over. Nothing is changing. And I'm putting literally 15 hours a day into this. I am just burnt out. I don't understand what's going on here. So it all brought me back to that first year, kind of the first year mindset, so to speak. Yeah. So I had a lot of very panicked calls to Ryan, and which he can attest to.
Yeah. Well, then at what point did you guys meet up? Was it then like, I guess I missed the time frame.
Yeah, it was two parts. It's a two-part meeting, right?
Okay.
So I had my my very challenging first year. I remember I did not know if I was going to pass or not. I found out I passed literally by just barely. And then it sort of put me in the mindset of thinking, all right, what am I going to do? This was so bad. I mean, bad. I don't know. Do I just not go back? Do I just quit? Maybe, some things just aren't meant to be. Then I said, okay, well, do I go and try to work harder? I'm like, okay, that's not possible. I can't work harder than I did. So then the other option is, do I go back and try to do it, figure out how to do it differently? Yeah. So that, I think I'd been home, not long. I was back home, my family home. And so what I started doing was I started calling other medical schools to say, what do you do with students who are struggling? And then someone actually brought up Ryan's program. And I got in touch with Ryan, and he had a class that was starting, I think, like in a week. And I was like, okay, all right. And I, was debating, do I do this or not? And my feeling was, if I don't do this, then I'm just not going back to medical school.
Maureen, if I can jump Absolutely. In, if memory serves, you called me and you said, I made it through first year. It about killed me.
Yes.
I'm thinking about not going back. I'm thinking about walking away from all this. And the only way I'll go back is if you can tell me that you can make it better for me. And I was like, well,
that's a tall order.
Yeah.
I know.
I was like, well, yeah. And I was like, I think so, but I can't guarantee anything, of course. And I think that was what it was. And I think, yeah, I was starting within a few days. And, so
I packed my bags and just drove there. And that was that.
And that was the live StatMed class.
That's our StatMed class. That's our StatMed class. Back then, we only did them live in person. We now do them live in person and live online. And yeah, that's where we redesigned the way that, a student like Maureen is going to go in and receive all this information, how she's going to organize it, how she's going to encode it, what she can do to sort of be at the levers of control. And it's a streaming process. How do you stream all this stuff being jammed at you? And we want to give them a variety of tools that they're going to use. And the thing is, like, they can't pick and choose. They don't know what's going to work for them and what's not. And sometimes I think Maureen had to use, like, probably if she listed the tools coming out of the class, the two that she liked the least, mapping and memory palaces, were the tools that she might have needed the most.
And those are the ones that now, like, those are the things, even now, I still use that to help me remember, to help me learn things and encode. Never left me.
And that's certainly the mission. It's like, they can use this not just for first year, second year, for boards, for residency. They can use them for the rest of their lives. And I think that's a powerful mission statement.
Absolutely. And so you're going into second year then, having gone through Ryan's class, correct?
Correct. So
you go to second year, and now what's your mindset like?
My mindset was, let's see how this goes. There was a part of me that believed that I still had in my mind, this might not work. This might not work. That was just so bad. But I said, well, I put this effort in. Let's just see what happens. I was unique. I think I was unique and the program, at least the one that I was in, because I was not repeating a year. So I had passed. So I had, what made it initially challenging was that you're still learning how to use these techniques, and nothing, even though you practice them in the summer, it's not the same as when you have, like, the information coming at you.
Well, it's like comparing practice to playing the game. You can't simulate it. And this is what we tell our students is, you're going to go in. And back then we had mostly remediators, and now it's about half and half. Many more people have followed Maureen's path, which is being proactive either before going into med school or in between the years. And it's just what suits the person. But she had to figure it out as she went.
The first couple months, and I know Ryan and I talked, we're kind of rocky because I'm still learning. You're still learning how to use these totally new study techniques.
Well,
learning how to learn,
how to learn, and the material's all new.
Right.
Well, but Maureen's special case was that, like I said, there's this. We teach over a dozen skills in the class, and the two that she needed the most, she probably didn't put as much emphasis on in the class and in the space between, with the mapping and the memory palaces for her.
Correct.
And so we almost had, I think it was like a month in, and I remember I'm driving to, Cincinnati or whatever, talking to you about this. And I'm like, I think you called me and said, I think those two skills that I think I wasn't going to need, I think I need them. And so then we had to, and then we're trying to change the wheel on the moving car because she's in the semester. But I think by the end of the semester, you were definitely up and running with it. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And it took, initially it takes you so long to do it and you're putting in so much effort. But I started seeing, like, wait a minute, this is working. Like, I'm remembering things and I'm understanding things in a way that I hadn't the previous year. And I was able to go into lectures with a little bit more confidence. That in and of itself is means a lot. And I remember, like, then suddenly, like, people started asking me about questions about, like, how to remember things, or asking me about, like, questions about the material because I was learning it so well.
Yeah.
And you could teach it, you could explain it, you were performing well. And I think your quality of life went from something like we said, like a 2 to a 7, or
as I said,
like your GPA.
It's still med school.
Right.
But there's no way around that. But my quality of life, at least at the very least, my anxiety level plummeted so much. I was just a calmer person. I was a much more pleasant person.
Yeah.
Which means a lot for the people around you.
Yes.
But I also I felt more confident going into this material. And I know no matter what, I think second year, once I was up and running, there was never a time when I'm like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to know this. I was literally like, wow, this is a lot. I'm glad I have the tools. All right, let's do this.
I want to get to your mindset come, the dedicated study period for step 1. This is the biggest test, right?
Absolutely.
So let's get to that. But Ryan, Maureen's state of mind, the way she was feeling, the overwhelming onslaught of information, what do students say to you when they come to you? Do you have a pretty common list?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think it's all patterns. I think you can see these patterns. Every med school is going to have students who fall within this bandwidth, and they can say things like they come to me and they say, "Well, I don't get it. I put in so many hours. Why am I not passing?" That means nothing to me. It's like, okay, I'm glad you're a self-described hard worker, but that's like saying I go to the gym every day. Why am I not getting fit? It depends on what you're doing. Something they'll say is I go to lecture and I sit there and then I get lost. And then I come out of lecture and I'm frustrated. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I get home and I feel like I'm starting from scratch. They say things like, I'm highlighting, I'm reading, I'm trying to read it 3 times. I feel like if I could read it 5 times, then it would click. Or I'm reading it twice. And I feel like if I could read it 4 times, it would click. These are just these arbitrary goals that are not really how learning happens. Maureen, what can you say?
And I know there was one thing I had said to you, and then you had said, oh, you've heard this so many times. I said, I spent the whole evening studying. I got home. I literally cannot remember a single thing I studied.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's because the nature of the engagement is so rote and passive. Reading something over and over again is not the pathway to actually learning, certainly dense material over a long period of time. I think a lot of these students, what's happening is they are what I call a single track brain. So maybe this person sitting next to Maureen, her friend who seems of the same intellectual ability as her, can sit and lecture and walk out, and then she's already 2 steps ahead. Whereas maybe the med student who's struggling is only a single tracker. So what that means is if you have 2 tracks, track 1, you can sit there. This is either reading straight through dense material, sitting in lecture. You can sit there and you can, on track 1, build the organizational superstructure of the lecture, for example. Let's say we're sitting in a 1-hour lecture, 75-point PowerPoint deck. And they can sit there and on track 1, build, imagine you've got a closet. They're building the shelves in that closet. They're putting the labels on the shelves on the 1 track. And on the 2nd track, they're putting the details where they belong, putting the details on the shelves. Even if that's only 5-10%, they're 5-10% ahead of the game and they've got the right information. Now the wheels are greased and things are rolling. This is how a lot of us feel in undergraduate classes, just sitting there because the information's manageable. But then that one of our students, that single tracker, they almost have to pick or choose the organizational superstructure or details. After the first test, certainly, when they took a shellacking on details, they're going to sit there and supermarket sweep sort of hoard these details. And they're just jamming stuff into that metaphoric closet without any rhyme or reason. And then they get home, they have nothing to show for it. They have to pick up the mess and start from scratch.
Literally.
And Maureen, is that fair? Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair.
Well, and so, let me ask, are details the sort of thing that normally we're able to learn through rote?
Probably if it's a finite amount.
I guess that's sort of a leading question, but my guess is there's a better way to try to include
but we can all look back at some undergraduate course where we were able to jam in details, but it's a finite amount over a short period of time. And that doesn't hold up in medical education. That's not going to hold up in first, second year. It's not going to hold up on boards. It's never going to hold up. So I think learning at this level has to begin with explicit, ideally externalized organization. And so we have to teach strategies to come in, and this can be a first aid chapter. It can be a first year lecture, anywhere in between, where we have to come in almost from a bird's eye view and teach students how to extract superstructure. It's not rocket science, but it's something we don't teach people because only a certain type of person would need it. A highly intelligent person with certain deficits in their overall learning framework.
So during that first year, I remember asking some of the, my friends, how are you studying? How are you? And they couldn't really explain it. And now looking back, what I understand now is that, I was asking them to explicitly explain something that they did implicitly.
Yes.
They didn't, it's like asking, they don't know how, it just happens for them, but there's no way, but because of that, there's no way they can explain it.
But that won't stop them from trying, right?
They'll try. And I want to say, like, the people were like, their intentions were good. But, one of the things I mentioned is, like, there's a couple things that I feel like med students do for, students who are struggling that are not helpful at all, even though the intentions are good. But a lot of that is having you, like, be tutored by a really high performing student. I get theoretically where that's, they know things, they can help you. It actually backfires so many times because, again, they don't understand, they can't explain how they're learning. And, the material in med school, the material itself is not that difficult. It's the memorization, it's keeping it all in. So it's not necessarily the explaining that you need. You need to know how to retain it.
Yeah.
I think what you would have said to me at some point is it's not that any given concept it escapes you or is beyond you. It's that there's so much that you have to keep, again, organized. Organization is that key. You've got to put it in a way that is highly organized. And that way you can sort of access it in what I call a three-dimensional manner. If I hold up a picture of an iPhone, you can say, hey, it's an iPhone if you're looking straight at the picture. But if I rotate the page, you can't see it. That's two-dimensional learning. Students need to be able to put it in a three-dimensional way. If I hold up an iPhone, you can say, hey, it's an iPhone. You can recognize it if I rotate it on various axes. And so again, you can't say, hey, learn in a three-dimensional way. That's useless advice. That would make Maureen yell at me and throw something at me.
Yeah.
So no, we have to, right. But we have to teach them means to those ends. And I think that's what we do with with our different methodologies that we teach. And that's what Maureen sort of rolled with going through first and second year.
All right. So bring us up
second year.
To second year. So you're about to approach step one.
Step one. And so, as I said, the one thing I realized is, again, I didn't learn anything first year. So I have to learn first year because it is part of step one. So I knew I needed more time. And one thing I will say, this is just in light of when I did the course, I didn't really spend a lot of time on the test taking strategies because for me, I had to get through second year and there was other things that were more pressing than test taking strategies in terms of the step one, because it was still like that was a year away. I just got to get through this. I have a year to have to get through. So that wasn't really a focus of mine. So that was part of it. And I didn't realize that I had, again, until you do it, you don't realize what issues you have.
Well, Maureen, let me also say it's really hard to identify truly bad test taking issues until you get into step one, like truly into the wheelhouse of prep, because you can't see the test taking issues when the knowledge deficits are so great. And I have a lot of first years who want to go full into the test taking rebuild, and we can't. We have to almost wait till step one. So sorry, carry on.
Anyway, I didn't spend a lot of time practicing that just because I had to learn, as we said, I needed to learn more fundamentals first. That was the most pressing thing. So I get to step one.
Is that the most pressing thing, Ryan? Like
for a second year student?
Yeah, like let's say, or is there a danger in thinking that if I learn the fundamentals, but maybe you're not applying effective encoding study methods, etc., that work would be like, I don't know, less valuable than trying to learn some of the strategy or tools? Does that question make sense? It's a little.
I think when you're in second year, one of the most important things is to make it through second year. I see so many students who, let's say they're using 95 to 100% of their brain power to get through second year. One of the most dangerous things, and Patrick, this might be a little sideways from what you were asking, but I think it's relevant. One of the most dangerous things is they hear all their peers saying, oh, I only did 50 questions last night on UWorld. I'm such a failure. Then you've got somebody over here burning themselves to death just to make it through. The most dangerous thing that person can do is feel that peer pressure. It's like classic middle school peer pressure.
Yes.
And feel like, oh, I better start allocating resources to UWorld, thinking about step one, but they haven't gotten through second year yet. Now, this isn't true of probably the majority of people listening to this, but there are certainly second year students who fall into that trap. And Maureen, you can probably speak to that.
As a psychiatrist, there's a certain narcissism, I think, that prevails amongst people attracted to our
Absolutely. Yeah, there is.
Oh, no doubt.
Absolutely. Well, I think at least in the situation I was in, at least that summer, I wasn't even thinking about step one or thinking about boards. I was just like, how do I pass pathology? Like that's as far I couldn't even go that far.
I think it's just a really dangerous trap in this last run up before they get as a second year, before the second years get to that dedicated period. If they have the extra resources, then by all means, if they're only utilizing 60% of their resources to get through classes, they have 40% of their resources they can then divert to step one study. Some people will say, well, by focusing on practice questions, I will therefore be practicing for my classes and step one. You know what? If that works for somebody, more power to them. Great, wonderful. But again, when you're sitting where Maureen was sitting, I think that's just a very dangerous mindset, power leaning on her. It's got its own gravitational pull, and then that could pull her off target. And again, Maureen, I'm sure that had to be somewhere in there, right? For you?
It was. And I think initially a lot of what I was doing is one of the techniques we did was we called, I forget the exact term you used, but almost writing on the side of the questions to kind of, as you're going through it, questions that you can quiz yourself during that.
We do a whole variety of what we call retrieval practice tools. Yeah. And you can quiz yourself without having to do practice questions.
Part of the one thing though, is I kind of gravitated toward that because I'm like, well, that's pretty straightforward. But that was all I was doing is just dealing with more details that were not organized. So it doesn't hold up long term.
Right. Well, and now the way we bring in this thing called frameworking, it does hold that up. But at the end of the day, Maureen, what we realized was she was a terrible, terrible test taker.
Yes.
Might be the most eloquent way of phrasing it is terrible test taker. But
was that a relief for you to kind of come to know yourself like that, Maureen?
I think it was. It just sort of made me realize that there were mistakes I was making, but then that meant there was something we could do about it. If you find out what's wrong, then hopefully you can figure out a way to fix it.
Oh, wow. That sounds like what we do in medicine, right?
Yeah, but it's the same thing. But at least when you have something to work with. So I think, I had the two issues. I had the issue with kind of the one, as Ryan talked about, that one track mind. I know I'm screwing up the terminology. But then I had the single track. Thank you. So that had to be addressed. But then there was the test taking issues, and that those didn't really present until I was prepping for step one. Okay. So you're prepping for step one. And when do you say, I need to hook back up with STATmed and do something else? I think it was after, at the end of second year, all of us were required to take one of the NBME exams. Yes. I guess we had to be able to get it above a certain score that the school would sort of give us the blessing to go take the test in June. And I didn't reach that score. I just missed it, but I didn't make it. So then I got in touch with Ryan and said, okay, here's what happened. I think we have a new problem here. Okay. And then that's kind of how it all started. Can you give me briefly what you were doing? Well, I guess you hadn't really been into the dedicated prep time when you took the computer-based science assessment or NBME practice step one, correct? Correct. Oh, okay. Correct. Okay. So you were very proactive. I think everybody is also probably wondering this outcome. So let me just ask straight. So did you pass step one initially? Yes. Okay. Did you meet your goal of what you were trying to get? I'll be honest with you. I didn't really have a goal. I was just let me just pass. Were you happy with your score? Well, then yes, you did, right? Yeah. I mean, and I did, and I passed by a very decent margin. Okay. Now, what do you think would have happened had you not gone through the STATmed program? Well, the program itself, actually, someone asked me, do you think you would have failed step one? I said, no, I wouldn't have failed step one. I never would have taken it. You wouldn't be a doctor today. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We would be having this conversation. So yeah, that's all I say. Do you think you would have failed? I say the answer is definitively no, I would not have failed. I would have never taken it. I think for me, if I hadn't done the STATmed program, I probably would have not continued with medical school. Wow. Ryan, that must keep you going every day. I mean, just try to connect this back to hope, but when you help people, you help one Maureen. Think of how many people she's helped just
in her years of psych training and how many she will as a psychiatrist. Like the impact is it's pretty awesome.
It's profound. I mean, it's a profound thing to process, and it's hard to, you can't process it really. They're amazing people, and we have, you develop relationships with your students where we get to know our students in a way that, they text you, they tell you their successes, they tell you when they're struggling. Everything that we've built comes from, these experiences. Like there are things in the board's workshop that are lessons that I like, names of patterns I named because of like working with Maureen, for example. Like, wow, like this is a thing, this is a pattern. I've seen this before. Wow, I think this is a real thing. And just the way that she and I communicated back then, I would be driving somewhere and say, hey, let's just talk about these 3 questions. And we'd hammer them out. There's no other way to find these patterns. There's no textbook, there's no rule book. And I'd be like, wow, Maureen, I think you keep doing the same thing over and over again, because it's hard for them to see the pattern because they're so down in the weeds. I can see up higher. I can see that bird's eye view, and then
physician, heal thyself. Right.
Right. So that's sort of where it comes from. But no, it is absolutely profound, and it gives me chills just thinking about where Maureen is right now and where she was when I met her.
I mean, that's why I think it's cool. Like that's why I have loved having conversations with you over the past month or so, off and online, because it's so mission focused and like to meet people like Maureen who realize there is something awry in their approach to medical school. I think all of us have some sort of moment like, what have I done? Like, this was maybe not a good decision. Like, I want to help people. There's all this idealism, but then you spend, all this time being beaten down by information and feeling inadequate and in fierce competition against everyone else, or really against yourself, in a lot of cases. And it eats away at you. And it sounds like fixing some of the learning issues or improving them for you, Maureen, actually helped you lead and live a better life, make and stay committed to choices that you had committed to prior to entering med school. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Well, I've been reading a little bit, kind of going back to like some of Viktor Frankl's logotherapy principles and this idea of meaning, and you can endure any how as long as you have like a why kind of thing. And to me, like, it takes a little bit of effort, but like for everybody who's listening who is studying for step 1, I will tell you, being out of med school now for 7, I guess, years, step 1 is, well, I mean, I guess I do a podcast for medical students focused on step 1. So I probably think about it more than other doctors, but like, I don't think about it. Doesn't affect me because it was, a 3-month slice of my life and then it was over. But like, I remember, I can put myself back in the position of a student, like overwhelmed, thinking, oh crap, if I don't do well on this, I'm not going to be able to, fill in the catastrophic thinking sort of stuff, right? Like, not going to be able to feed my family, not going to be able to do what I love, not going to have the career, all my dreams are dead, right? Like, that's, I think, sometimes where students will go. If you find yourself doing that, then definitely, reach out to your support system for help. But even more so for those who are like, yeah, whatever, like, I have pretty decent natural study skills and tools when it comes to test taking. I got this content and I don't really care if I get a super good score. I still think all of us, there's a good exercise for us to take a moment and just try to connect what you're doing study-wise to the reasons you went to med school, and really put it in the context of it being a helping profession, because you're enduring all this stuff. You're enduring it to help people. That's what's happening. Like, don't let that bent toward altruism die a terrible, agonizing death because of what you have to learn, most of which you won't really need to remember.
Very
7, 8, 10, 20, 1 year after med school. So that, I don't know, that was kind of preachy, but I'm trying to encourage you people out there.
Well, and the other thing I, want to mention is, the idea of a student struggling in med school, no one talks about it.
Yeah.
No one will discuss it. It's this taboo thing. You don't want to, well, first, you don't want people to know because you don't want to be that student because you've never been that student. But it's an incredibly, incredibly isolating experience. And if anything, if I can do with this podcast is just to first let people know you're not alone.
No.
There are people who are struggling. You may not know it because no one's telling you, but people are out there like you. You're not alone. And just because you're struggling now doesn't mean you can't reach the end result. You may have to put in time and things may have to be, the path may be a little bit different than you had anticipated.
Absolutely.
And yes, and sometimes there's challenges related to that, but it doesn't mean you can't necessarily get there.
As much as I would love to talk more about this and think of practical strategies people could implement to help that ailment and be more mindful, have more, I guess, a handle on the difficulties in managing the stress. What I'd like to do is, are we able to kind of like get a slice of what you're doing within the STATmed platform with students who need help?
Yeah, I mean, I think an easy way to look at this is, maybe pull up a question and maybe we can even use Maureen to sort of gameplay this question and sort of see where people go right and wrong. Again, once Maureen, we realized she was struggling, like the test taking was an issue and it wasn't a content thing. We put her through the board's workshop. Correct. And that's a very mechanical, one size fits all on the front end process. And then you tailor it on the back end for the individual. So maybe if we go through a question, we can sort of play out and talk about specific strategies that any bad test taker, any test taker could fold into their own prep as they're prepping for their step one or whatever that test might be. Is that fair?
And we will end it here. Look for part 2 in the upcoming weeks. Head over to the new channel for the Inside the Board Study Smarter series for the USMLE Step 1 and COMLEX Level 1, where throughout that series we will be featuring STATmed Learning lessons with Ryan, offering some practical advice on study strategy and exam strategy from STATmed Learning. So go to the statprogram.com. And as always, thank you for listening.